It had been a long time since anyone had baked at 4 Cecil Street. Much to her mother's dismay, Amy had never been great in the kitchen. What had begun as a feminist rebellion during high school, "You're only telling me all this because I'm a girl," had morphed into a convenient cover for a lack of talent. But she did love the smell of something warm rising in the oven. Although she would never admit it, the biscuity aroma nearly brought a tear to her eye that morning. Amy cried at the most preposterous things nowadays, a predicament that struck her as strange and just a little cruel after the long and dry-eyed months and years that had followed Ruby's passing. Oh, how she'd tried to make herself weep during that horrific period, pounding her head against hard surfaces, pinching her skin until her capillaries burst into nebula of tiny red stars. But the more she willed it to happen, the more impossible it seemed. Not so now. Now, Amy would be driving to pick Lucie up from school, and a long-forgotten song would come on the radio, something cheesy like "More Than Words" or "Every Breath You Take," and instead of the road in front of her, she would see the face of a fleeting crush she'd danced with once at a school disco or kissed during a game of spin the bottle, and before long the tears would be flowing. Amy sat at her desk and closed her eyes. She allowed the filtered sunlight to warm her forehead, her chin, her cheeks. Her study had once been the nursery, where first Lucie and then Ruby had slept, and it remained her favourite room in the house. Its north-facing window looked straight onto the backyard, but unlike the kitchen, which bore the brunt of the summer sun, the nursery, which was how Amy still thought of it, was shielded by the eaves and leafy branches of a maple tree. Most days, this was how Amy spent her time, sitting at her desk with her eyes closed and her face turned to the window, neither writing nor doing much of anything. She would help Lucie with a few questions about her schoolwork sometimes around 10 o'clock. Amy's skills in grade 5 mathematics turned out to be embarrassingly poor, before traipsing down the corridor to the kitchen to make a couple of sandwiches for lunch. Months had passed in this way. The deadline for her second book was almost upon her, and yet she remained motionless, watching its approach like some large-eyed marsupial in the high beams of a B-double. Sometimes, instead of sitting at her desk, she would lie on the floor in the exact spot, still marked by 4 dents, where the cot had stood. Once there, she would stare at the constellation of glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling, now sickly green in the afternoon light. After the accident, she and Jin had discarded as much as they could, but every so often Amy would discover something they'd missed. An absurdly small sock at the back of Lucie's underwear drawer, or a rattle behind the washing machine, or a bib buried in the pocket of an old handbag. Now, instead of throwing these relics away, Amy collected them. She treated them like pieces of treasure, lifting them to her nose and smelling them, convincing herself that, under the mustiness, she could still detect a faint scent of baby.